Hey everyone, how you doing? It's Jeff C. It is Tuesday, March the 11th. You're listening to Free Radio Revolution, and today I'm coming to talk about gatekeepers. One in particular, I've wanted to address this for a long time. This is a serious problem when you have very high-ranking liberals, intellectual liberals, pseudo-intellects. Today I'm talking about none other than Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky's complete and utter dismissal of any 9/11 conspiracy theory, which by fact 9/11 is a conspiracy, right? Even if you believe in the official story, it is 100% conspiracy because people conspired to carry out the act. But of course we know all too well by now that the term conspiracy theory, as used by the corporate mainstream media or the pseudo gatekeeping media like Democracy Now!, who are there to keep you in this paradigm and not shatter the illusions that are set up by the powers that be. Conspiracy theory is a term that is used to dismiss. It's a derogatory term. It's used to belittle anybody who questions the official story of major events, and you can't get more major than 9/11. In fact, 9/11 is the event of our times. Nothing has changed our way of life more than 9/11. And to hear someone like Chomsky, who goes on and on about civil rights and all these things that on the surface seem pretty good, you know, seem logical, and then completely and utterly dismiss any possibility that the government had anything to do with 9/11, you know, there's no other way to slice it. This guy is controlled opposition. He is getting a paycheck, and he is there paid to tell you what to do, what to believe in, and where never to go. And there's more and more of these jackasses coming out every day. Now, I've had this thing up for a while now while I'm talking. This is very serious to me. I'm going to show this video here that belongs to somebody else, but this is all for fair use, non-profit, and is for the purpose of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody. So don't even think about trying to levy me with a fucking copyright strike. So here we go. Let's listen into this Noam Chomsky discuss his disgust with 9/11 truthers, and I will definitely chime in now and again.
The 9/11 one is pretty interesting, actually. It's a huge part of the country. I mean, I think it's like maybe a third of the population or half the population. The activists in it, the people in the center of it, as far as I can tell, very few of them are people with any record or involvement in political activism.
Immediately discrediting people who question 9/11. Of course, this is a way of him saying, well, they're not part of the government, so how could they bother? You know, they have no right to, almost, right?
They're not doing anything.
They're not doing anything.
Maybe a couple here and there. Most of them are just drawn into it. And, you know, and they have factoids too. Like somebody found nanothermite, whatever the hell that is.
Whatever the hell that is. Eh? Somebody found nanothermite, whatever the hell that is. Right? Right away dismissing it. No, it's only the stuff that's used for controlled demolitions. And since a huge amount of it was found at the wreckage of the World Trade Center, then it is extremely important. It might even be the most important evidence that it is. But there is your leftist Jewish gatekeeper dismissing any possibility that that could be substantial evidence. Let's continue.
And the bottom of Building 7 or whatever, okay.
Whatever.
I have no idea what it means or if it means anything. But that's the core of a large part of the evidence that was done by the Bush administration. Now, the people who are writing about this, they are experts in physics and civil engineering on the basis of an hour on the internet.
There you go. An hour on the internet. I don't even know how many hours I've spent researching 9/11. Probably over 1,000 in my life. But that's it. I'm just some idiot with a keyboard and a computer, and I spent an hour, and therefore there's no validity in anything I say. Let's continue.
Okay, so you spend an hour on the internet, you become a super expert in civil engineering, physics, and you learn what nanothermite is, and and so on. And it's kind of like, I mean, I don't have to tell you what
it's comic
it takes to understand something about physics. It's not an hour on the internet. They've managed to collect a very small scattering of architects and, one or two people who are supposed to be scientists and a couple of others.
There you go. Just dismiss the whole entire architects and engineers movement, which has over 2,000 architects and engineers. These are people who are accredited, that work in universities, that have risked their careers in order to expose the greatest hoax in American history. And this guy dismisses them as one or two scientists and a bunch of crackpots, right? Let's go on.
Who write articles in the Journal of 9/11 Studies and maybe sometimes in an online journal somewhere. And so, okay, that proves that the scientific world is with us. And then comes along a big story. Some obvious questions. Like, suppose the Bush administration did it. Why would they blame Saudis? Are they insane?
Oh my God, I could just rip this guy. Why would they blame Saudis? Why would they blame Afghanistan? Well, you don't know anything, obviously, about Afghanistan and how important it is to take over that drug trade, how important it is to build pipelines from the Caspian Sea, all these other things. But no, just dismiss all that. Just say that Afghanistan, why on earth would they go to Afghanistan? Afghanistan has no value whatsoever. No, it's the only 90% or 95% of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan. Endless resources in that untapped, huge country, right dead center in the middle of all this oil that could be shipped around. Yeah, whatever, right?
I mean, they wanted to invade Iraq, right? Everybody
they wanted to invade all of those places.
So why don't they blame Iraqis? Okay, if they had blamed Iraqis, open and shut case.
Open and shut case. They blame Iraqis. They didn't need to blame Iraqis. They wanted to go into Afghanistan. They're still in Afghanistan. They still control Afghanistan, you fucking tool. And this is this stupid straw man sort of logic that he takes, dismisses any possibility that Afghanistan has any importance other than just the fact that that's where the terrorists reportedly came from. Fucking douchebag.
The whole country's for you. You get a UN resolution, and NATO supports you. You just go ahead and invade Iraq. Since they blame Saudis, therefore harming themselves, that's their closest ally, they had to go jump through hoops to try to invent stories about weapons of mass destruction and connections to Al-Qaeda and all this other thing. They finally invaded Iraq. So, like, are they lunatics? I mean, that's one thing.
Yeah. Yes, they are lunatics, and you work for them, you fucking traitor.
Possibility, of course. You got another explanation for why they should blame Saudis?
The 9/11 person would say yes, because they're very, very slow.
They're very devious. Yeah, that's exactly what you get. It would have been too obvious if they blamed Iraqis, so they had to do it some other way. Yeah, you can you can find answers to anything if you try hard enough. And huge efforts are going into this. Nothing's ever going to happen. They tried it for 7 years. They never indicted Bush. Of course, we're never going to.
See that? He's certain nothing's ever going to happen. How would he be so certain? Well, because he is in the know. And he is there for a purpose. Fuck yeah.
They go on for another 50 years. It's never going to have any effect. It does have an effect. It diverts a lot of energy and effort from trying to do something like, say, stop the war in Iraq. But of course, that takes effort and it's costly and so on. They also feel extremely brave.
Yeah, because researching 9/11, spending countless hours and putting up videos, all the work that people have done, making films, that takes no effort whatsoever. It's lazy, right? They're not doing anything. No research. Nah. Fucking jerk.
Because it's so risky to write a note on the internet saying, I think Bush is a really bad guy. Wow, you're practically in Guantanamo. And then they can find some guy who, instead of teaching his courses, taught about this stuff and therefore wasn't rehired, which is normal. And I would have never been rehired if I'd done it. I taught courses on this kind of stuff, but in my spare time, you have some duties at the university. But you can put all this stuff together and get some story. So you're feeling very brave and bold, and then come stories about the reasons why people like me don't go along. We're secret CIA agents. We're, I think the phrase is left gatekeepers. There's a category of left gatekeepers. The government inserts into the popular movements people who pretend to be critical, but they're really gatekeepers. They're just trying to stop the real criticism. Bush put the bombs in Building 7 and
Yes, he just described himself to a T, and also the way that he always says, this is the way he always does it, that Bush did it, Bush put the bombs in, Bush physically did 9/11, like Bush wasn't a fucking puppet, right? Just a fucking idiot who's there as a fucking personality to fucking move the sheeple in the right direction. That's the way he does it, right? It's all strategy here.
And you can build up big stories like that, and a lot of people believe them. I mean, it's a little bit like believing that the reason for why my life is collapsing is because the rich liberals who own the corporations are giving everything away to illegal immigrants. It's an answer to, you find some factoids about that. But people who are, kind of at a loss, they don't trust anything rightly. They don't trust institutions. They think everybody's lying to them. Their lies are no good. Nothing makes any sense. Okay, these things have a certain appeal. They, like Rush Limbaugh, they have an internal logic. Maybe they don't make, and if you don't understand what an explanation is, a collection of factoids is an explanation.
There's one part of it that is pretty striking, at least to me, which is if 30 or 40% of the United States population believes that Bush did it, I mean, obviously it's ludicrous, but 30 or 40% of the population believes he did it. Well, that means there's virtually nothing that the left can say to that 30, 40% of the United States that's worse. I mean, how bad can you get, right? So then you have to ask, why is that 30, 40% not doing anything, given that they think they live in whatever it is that they think?
Yeah, they think they're run by a mass murderer who wants to kill the American people. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next topic.
You see how everything is simplified? I mean, the douchebag that's interviewing him, what a fucking idiot, right? Why don't you just get on your fucking knees and start licking his fucking cake hole? I mean, seriously, right? These people, the worst people of all, the people that look up to these scumbags like Noam Chomsky. I mean, seriously, this guy is a fucking traitor, right? A Zionist and a fucking traitor. And this shit that he's saying, the way he dumbs it down, and this is, you got to look at it because a lot of the people that are coming in, right, as I said, a lot of liberals, a lot of Democrats would come and listen to Noam Chomsky, would pay big money to see him fucking go on in his fucking gravelly voice about how ridiculous 9/11. They think that Bush did it all and Bush planted the bombs. And yeah. That's how you make people look stupid. You simplify the argument. You make it sound so ridiculous that nobody will buy it. That's exactly what's going on.
But it is interesting because it says, what do you have to do to talk to that sector of people, not about 9/11, but about changing the world that they live in?
I ask a lot of people that. Yeah. So, you think you're being run by a maniac who wants to kill all the Americans. Why don't you do anything about it? The answer is always the same. It's hopeless.
Yeah,
there's nothing we can do. I mean, we're just...
Yeah. See that? The answer is always the same. It's hopeless. There's nothing we can do. Right? So is he out there every day talking to 9/11 truthers? Probably almost never. The only time he really confronts them is when somebody comes to one of his speaking engagements and yells something about Building 7, and then he just goes on a whole bullshit thing like he's going on right now about how ridiculous the whole thing, and why blame it on Saudis, or Saudis as he calls them. Why would they do this? It's all straw man argument. It's all bullshit. It's not taking the facts that exist. It's not analyzing the chain of events. It's dismissing everything, right? Just saying it doesn't make sense because they would never do this. This is how some of my family members respond to 9/11 when I talk about it. It's like, why would they do that? Why would they do that? They just can't even get past that part. They just can't even get past. They can't get past the part that the psychopaths that run the planet are evil.
Victims of some powerful force.
But it is an important answer. Because it says something to us about what our agenda has to be. We have to overcome that.
You have to say, look, there are things you can do about the real problems. First of all, figure out what the real problems are. Then you can do something about them. But of course, that's, that for the person you're talking to, that's a much harder choice.
Sure.
It's easier to say, I can't do anything, I give up. It's easier to say that than to say, look, there are a lot of things I can do, and go ahead and do them.
So all the people, the thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of people that do all this work, whether it's blogs, YouTube videos, anything, just talking to people, going out, the signs that have been put up, the building, question Building 7, all the efforts that gone in, fundraising, everything that's been done. No, they're not doing any of that, right? They're not trying to change anything. No. They're just saying it's hopeless, it's lost. Look at how, this guy, seriously, dude, I would fucking decimate you in an argument, you fucking turd. That's why you'll never fucking ever acknowledge people like myself.
They really are risky and so on. It's that way with a lot of things. I mean, take, say, the...
It's very graphic.
This one's very graphic. There are a lot of others, not quite this graphic, but I mean, take, say, the Israeli lobby story. It's extremely convenient to believe that the Israeli lobby controls the United States. First of all, what can I do? You know, the Jews are so powerful, I can't do anything. The other thing is, it preserves American innocence. So we are the city on the hill. It's just that we're being led around by these Jews. What can we do? And in many ways, it's a very attractive position. I mean, it falls apart as soon as you look at it, obviously. It doesn't make any difference.
Obviously.
And it does attract a lot of people on the left. A lot of people.
Yeah. You know, that's how they do it. And it's a perfect example of how these gatekeepers work. Their straw man arguments that they use, they refuse to even acknowledge the slightest possibility that there could have been involvement. They dismiss it all just on a false logic, on 100% bullshit. Look at his argument, right? I've done so many videos dealing with 9/11, dealing with Afghanistan, dealing with the Wolfowitz doctrine, dealing with all these different factors that led up to 9/11. There's so much evidence, all the evidence that is available, that is real evidence, not the bullshit fabricated crap like the fucking passport that was found in mint condition 4 blocks away from the World Trade Center. All the real evidence that has been gathered on 9/11 proves beyond any doubt that the only people that had the wherewithal to carry this out were forces within the American administration and with the help of Mossad, Israeli connections, high-powered corporations, financial institutions. That is where all the logic leads one to believe, right? And this piece of shit turd is telling you there's no way the Jews are not involved. There's no way Bush couldn't have done it. There's no way he couldn't have planted all those bombs himself. What did he do? Did he go in when it was at nighttime? He sneak out the White House and plant bombs? That's the way that they would present it, right? Because it's all Bush. It's just disgusting. We're going to take a closer look here at Mr. Chomsky and get a real good idea of what kind of a hypocrite this guy is. Political commentator, linguist, and tenured MIT professor Noam Chomsky is a popular figure trumpeted by many, including mainstream news outlets, as being a sophisticated and highly influential anti-government activist who lectures about the perils of capitalism and America being a police state. See, it all sounds good on the surface when you look at Mr. Chomsky. He's always coming out and saying a lot of the right things that people want to hear, so they go, oh, they gravitate towards Mr. Chomsky. Well, he's a smart man. He's a wise man. He tells me what I want to hear. However, a number of reasons show Chomsky's persona as essentially being a charade, including his portrayal of himself as an anarchist socialist dissident due to his profiting heavily from communicating his messages and enjoying most of the perks of the capitalist society, which he specifically criticizes, and the fact that he has profited heavily by taking millions of dollars from working for the Pentagon, while at the same time denouncing it as an evil institution. Yes, there's no doubt this guy has been on the payroll for a very, very long time. Now, we're going to look at some of these points here. Following our points described the information contained in a chapter of the book, Do I Say Not As I Do, speaking about Noam Chomsky. Chomsky described the Pentagon as one of the most evil institutions in the world, the most hideous institution on earth, these are quotes, which constitutes a menace to human life. And he also made statements about the military has no business being on college campuses, whether for recruiting, researching, or helping students pay for college, and professors should fight racism, poverty, and repression rather than working for the Pentagon. However, Chomsky has been paid millions by the Department of Defense over the past 40 years. mainly through his work at the Pentagon, funded by MIT Research Laboratory of Electronics, which even offered perks that other departments in the school did not. Chomsky's first book, Syntax Structures and Aspects of Theory Syntax, were written with grants from the U.S. Army, the Air Force, and the Office of Naval Research. Can you fucking believe it? He worked with his wife, who was also a linguist, in the DoD-funded project called Baseball, and helped to develop command and control computer systems used to support our forces in Vietnam. They're making it easier for commanders' queries to be translated into language that computers could deal with. It's just the complete hypocrisy of this guy, this bumbling fucking academic who goes around in shoddy-looking clothes and unkempt hair and acts like he's all this anarchist socialist, but really he's working for the state. Here, in 1967, Chomsky challenged fellow professors to take a moral responsibility for their actions, denounce the Pentagon, and admit that they were compromised by advising the government. But then a Columbia professor, George Steiner, wrote a letter published in the New York Review of Books asking Chomsky if he would stop teaching at MIT. But Chomsky balked at the suggestion despite his having the option to teach at essentially any other university in the country of his choosing. And Chomsky goes on about how these architects and engineers will not bring their information or their studies or their scientific findings to MIT. Yeah, like that's gonna work, right? Like MIT is gonna allow them the platform to fucking expose the biggest hoax ever. One question by Schweitzer about his associations with military funding, Chomsky surprisingly responded with a very clear rationalization of, I think we should be responsible for what we do, not for the bureaucratic question of who stamps the paycheck. Do you think you are not working for the Pentagon? Ask yourselves about the origins of the computer and the internet you are now using. So this asshole is such a flaming hypocrite. It is unbelievable. Chomsky also contradicts himself when speaking about issues of class struggle. He describes himself as a socialist whose goal is post-capitalist society, calling capitalism a grotesque catastrophe, crafted to induce hopelessness, resignation, and despair. He speaks in terms of us versus them, with them being the top 10% of taxpayers, despite Chomsky being among the top 2% in the United States in net wealth, probably in the 1% or 0.01 now, and the location of his primary residence being in the extremely affluent and exclusive wooded suburbs of Lexington, Massachusetts. He also has set up trust funds and assigned copyrights to others in his family to keep his wealth from being taxed, despite being a strong proponent of estate taxes and income redistribution. It's just an endless, amount of hypocrisies, contradictions. This guy is a walking bag of contradictions. Chomsky has been critical of private property rights as well, claiming them to only be a tool for the rich, contrary to the views of the American statesmen such as Jefferson, Hamilton, and Adams. He also claims that intellectual property rights should only be thought in negative terms such as protectionism. However, his works are clearly labeled with warnings about copyright infringement. It is usually necessary to pay a fee to download information from his website, and he gives opportunities to sub-license material for a fee. Once again, Mr. Contradictions. Despite Chomsky being strongly outspoken about corporations being private tyrannies, he has invested in all sorts of business that he rails against, including oil companies, military contractors, and pharmaceuticals, rather than opting for other investment options such as money market funds or government bonds, which do not have as high a rate of return. When asked about his investment portfolio issues, he responded, "Should I live in a cabin in Montana?" Suggests that there is just no way around making unethical investments. See, it's okay to preach all this stuff, but no, when you're living your life, well, you can't escape it. We're all working for the Pentagon, right, Mr. Chomsky? Despite Chomsky being an outspoken about the oppression of women and minorities for over half a century, he has personally hired or approved staff at the linguistics and philosophy departments that he had created at MIT, and it is shown that in the early years of his hires were almost exclusively white males, and even today it is shown that MIT linguistics department is top heavy with white males, while the support staff is largely made up of women. Chomsky is often is very outspoken about defending free speech in the Western world where it already exists, but he describes communist countries such as North Vietnam essentially only in glowing terms, such as in his book At War with Asia, while not criticizing their extremely repressive straits. And finally here is described how Chomsky went on a speaking tour of the Middle East shortly after 9/11 attacks, giving talks stating that America's Middle East policies had provoked the attacks, stating that a number of the victims of U.S. savagery are right up to the present moment. For the first time, almost in 2 centuries, the guns have been pointed in the opposite direction. So, you can see his purpose clearly. He received most of his funding from the Pentagon, and yet he goes around pretending to be the biggest critic of the Pentagon. He espouses all these sort of liberal, anarchist, socialist sort of philosophies, rails against capitalism, and yet, pretty much copyrights everything that he can. Is in the top 2%. On I said he's probably by now up in the top 1% or 0.01% of wealth owners. And just because he can go around with crappy sweaters on and unkempt hair, he thinks he can pull off that charade. And the liberals, the most asleep people in the world are really the liberals. I mean, seriously. They're the ones that get lulled to sleep by the Cenk Uygurs and the Anderson Coopers and Wolf Schitzers. Right? And this guy, Chomsky, is their darling. He's their hero, right? Going around telling everybody, how could you even begin to entertain any sort of thought that our government could be behind the worst terrorist attack in the history of the United States, the worst attack on American soil. There's no way. He won't even acknowledge the possibility. It's an insult to him, which tells you clearly that he is a complete hypocrite. This type of mind control that is practiced in the United States, which Chomsky is a master at, really. I mean, that's what it's all about. Chomsky's there to tell you all these things, and then when it comes to the biggest things of all, the things that you should question more than anything, because, let's be honest, right? I've said it before at the beginning, I've said it many times before on Free Radio Revolution, that the biggest event of our times is 9/11. The most changes to our society, and I'm not just talking United States, I'm talking Canada, Europe, around the world. The way we fly airplanes completely changed. The way that we check our luggage, the way that police are monitoring everything we do, the NSA, everything else. I will have to let you go.
You're right that there's a consensus among a minuscule number of architects and engineers, tiny number, a couple of them are perfectly serious. They are not doing what scientists and engineers do when they think they've discovered something. What you do, when you think you've discovered something, what you do is write articles in scientific journals, give talks at the professional societies, go to the civil engineering department at MIT and present your results, and then proceed to try to convince the national academies, the professional society of physicists and civil engineers, the departments in the major universities, convince them that you've discovered something. Now, there happen to be a lot of people around who spent an hour on the internet and think they know a lot of physics, but it doesn't work like that. There's a reason why there are, there's a reason, may I finish? There's a reason why there are graduate schools in these departments and research. Like there's one article that appeared in an online journal which
claims to have found, where someone claims to have found traces of nanothermite in Building 7. I don't know what that means. You don't know what that means. But if it means anything, bring it to the attention of the scientific community. That's